Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about...
I'm curious about building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about...
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
Before we jump into this conversation, I just need to make a note. My audio during my conversation with Effy wasn't great. And when we say change the noise, that's not what we mean. Instead, I am dealing with a few tech issues, but we are working it out. But we did not want to rob you of this conversation and this content. So hopefully you can let us slide on the audio for this one and really just listen for the conversation. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Curious Folks podcast, for those challenging the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla, and today we're talking about couples privilege and the experience of auxiliary partners.
So before we delve into that, I just want to name that we've had yet another of my favorite, and I say favorite, I say that with rolling eyes, favorite holiday, Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm. You love you some Valentine's Day.
I have so many problems with Valentine's Day. It's almost cliche how much I dislike this holiday. Just what it does to our society, to our understanding of relationships, about love. And I find it so destructive that I just rave on about it almost every year. And now that I have a platform like this, try to stop me, everyone.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to hear Effy's first of all, your full dig down deep into the history of Valentine's Day, then all of your opinions about Valentine's Day. And then actually we snuck in some strategies for how you can celebrate Valentine's Day if you're in non-monogamous relationships. Then go to episode 59 of our podcast, because you're going to get your fill. You're going to get all of the Valentines critique that you can handle.
So here's the thing. Like, I want to make a nuanced note here, if I may, since this is a podcast platform. I hopefully can. So the original, again, jump back onto episode 59 to understand the origins of Valentine's Day. Here's the thing. The origins of Valentine's Day is so me. It's like debauchery and ritual and almost dancing naked in the woods, you know, as a part of this special day. Like the origins of it is just I love the idea of it. I love it. I really do wish we had those pagan St. Valentine's Day celebrations. Then count me in all day, every day. I'll be at the front of the Pride Walk for it. However, Valentine's Day as of today just sucks. It is so sterile and cliche and predictable and boring and entirely commercial that it adds to my annoyance with it, because the roots of it is just sounds so awesome. And then you look at it today, you're like, come on, everyone.
That defines so much, so many things that had such promise at some point. And then we've destroyed it.
Right? It's just, come on. I don't know. I feel very strongly about it. But what about you? What did you do on Valentine's Day?
I didn't really do anything. I bought candy for the people in my life, because that's the thing you do. And so I did that. I was not with my partner for Valentine's, so I hid the candy in my drawer. And then that morning I was like, "Happy Valentine's, look in my drawer." So it was like surprise candy. And then for my wife and daughter, I just like put it on the table. I'm like, "Happy Valentine's Day, there's some candy." That's it. Well, actually, no, that's not true. In the morning, I made heart-shaped pancakes for my daughter. But that's really our commitment to celebrate all of the holidays in big ways. Like, we want as much celebration and wonder and joy in our life as possible. So we try to make a bigger deal out of holidays and non-holidays. So that was what that was about, more than my love for Valentine's Day. But that's it. There was nothing else Valentine's-y about it.
Nice. Yeah, I just sat around, sulked, and just got generally annoyed by this was happening around me, to be honest. I'll be honest with you. That's kind of what I do these days.
I'm sure lots of people did that, actually.
No, I mean, even with like multiple partners, I'm just like, not today. Like, I'm not celebrating anybody, anything.
With any of you.
any of you. And then just no, not today. Come back another day. Is where I find myself year after year these days, just like annoyed and grumpy. Just generally annoyed and grumpy at it.
You're just like walking around, like yelling at things, and just like, yeah, I can imagine. I'm glad that I'm not spending Valentine's Day with you ever. Yeah.
Right? But any other day, I'm like the funnest person to have around, you know, but not on Valentine's Day. I'm just want to kick people's shins. And let me add to this, just to add to my annoyance with Valentine's Day. It's one of those days when couple privilege and hierarchy in relationships are most pronounced and felt consciously or subconsciously by pretty much everyone, right? People who are couples, people who are not couples, people who are single or solo poly or secondary partners, and we're throwing secondary partners with air quotes out there. It's like, just to add insult to injury, that you also have this like Valentine's Day just like comes and like disrupts everything as far as I'm concerned.
So honestly, transparently, I'm interested in this conversation as well, because I've only, I wouldn't say I've only known it, but mainly known couples privilege from being a part of the couple. Mm-hmm. And have unintentionally, well, sometimes intentionally, not intentionally in a bad way, not intentionally on purpose, but like intentionally because I was thinking about my core relationship and not thinking about my metamour or my partner's auxiliary partner. Like I have put impositions in, I've put in rules in my day. There has been a guideline or two in my relationship, an agreement or such. And so I know that you have had much more experience within being an auxiliary partner. I think I had very limited. At one point I dated somebody, and on our first date, they told me all the things that we could and could not do. We could not go to a concert together. We could not hang out on Sunday afternoons. There was a nice little list. And I was like, okay. But that was really it. And so I would like to know more and be better and continue to self-reflect. And so I'm excited about this conversation for that purpose.
Sure. Yeah, I've definitely tried all different combinations to what they feel like. And I've spent a considerable amount of time as auxiliary partners in different relationships. And, you know, I've got experience and I can definitely talk to that. I feel like we should just start from the beginning, right? So let's talk about couples privilege and even step back even further to really zoom out and look at privilege. Like what is privilege exactly, right? So privilege is about how society accommodates you, essentially. It is your lifestyle, your choices, the way that you show up just seems to flow with society's expectation of the norm. Again, I'm throwing the norm up in air quotes, right? It is all about the advantages that you think are normal, right? Because you are deemed to be normal. Okay, so that's kind of what privilege is. What it isn't, right, is it's not really about you. Right? It's awarded to you. It's not your fault. It's not anything that you've done or thought or said, right? And also, just because you have privilege, it doesn't mean you're taking advantage of it or you're cheating or that you are imposing your privilege on anybody else. Privilege is not inherently bad. It really just is, right? When that is applied to couples, and you have couple privilege, is essentially the advantages that an established couple has over other relationships or single folks.
That's really helpful, and that makes sense to me. I think what I'm hearing you say is that privilege is not something extra that you get, which is often what people say, is that they did not have a privileged life. And I think what they mean is they didn't have an inheritance. They didn't have easy access to their father's IT company. But what I'm hearing you say is privilege is just about society designing something around you, around your straightness, around your cisness, around your whiteness, around your monogamousness. And it's not anything that you have to do. It just in being, because you are naturally a part of the majority, the design is designed around you.
Exactly. That society bends to your will without really putting up too much of a fight is really what it is. And when it's applied to couples, it is just the way the society prioritizes couples in its hierarchy. the important thing about privilege that it is awarded, right? It is awarded, and it is actually a passive label, if you will, as opposed to hierarchy, right? Which is enforced, right, by those at the top of the pyramid, right? So hierarchy is not inherent in privilege, but it does show up in relationships.
Yes.
And couple privilege is often talked about in the context of hierarchical relationship and the secondary partner, because it's most pronounced when a new person is added to an existing relationship, right? The struggle can begin when the couple privilege and the advantages of couple privilege are used to hold power after other partners, right? And that's when hierarchy and couple privilege kind of have different experiences.
And it's, honestly, that's the majority of the time, frankly, when we're talking about non-monogamy. Many times we're talking about the couple opening up, the experience of the couple opening up, the jealousy that happens within that couple, and all those other pieces, even talking about the metamor as the other person who is a part of it and not necessarily. So it makes sense in what you're describing. And actually, I think what I'm hearing too is the distinction. So for example, within my situation, within my relationships, my privilege with my wife is that we have healthcare, for example, right? That is just given to us by the law as a result of us being married. My partner and I don't have that privilege because that is not what society has designed around us. And then with hierarchy, my partner coming into the relationship with, once I was with my wife, there were certain things like my wife and I spend Christmas together that week, or we go every week away for, to a warm place in the wintertime, or those things are fixed and she has to adjust around those things. That's an indication of some hierarchy versus privilege, from what I understand you saying.
Exactly. And I think this shows up in like other relationships. Like you have a daughter, and I assume that relationship is a privileged one and is hierarchically at the top of the totem pole. So it doesn't necessarily have to be only in romantic relationships. I think it's worth just understanding privilege and hierarchy and then kind of reflecting on it without a value judgment, right? And saying like, how are you handling it? And if whether people in it agree or suffer and are oppressed by it is really what we're discussing here, rather than saying privilege is bad, hierarchy is bad, and you stop it all, right? That's definitely not what we're saying here.
Yes, I agree with you. Right. There's nothing wrong with any particular form of relationship construct, as long as the folks in it are happy and thriving. And the moment that is not the case is when we are offering up some suggestions and alternatives to consider.
Exactly. And also hierarchy, like, we talked about your relationship with your daughter, right? That kind of has a natural hierarchy, right? And here it's worth just taking a second to talk about different types of hierarchy. There's like descriptive hierarchy, right? And descriptive hierarchy are relationships naturally have a level of closeness in different categories, right? So you could be more emotionally connected with a partner. You could be co-parenting with a partner. There's a sort of inherent hierarchy that is kind of natural.
So in my case, that sounds like that would mean my wife and I own a home together. And that existed before my partnership, my other partnership. And so as a result of that, there are financial ties, there are asset ties, there are lots of commitments that are natural in that dynamic as a result of that I imagine have some imposition unknowingly or knowingly for my partner.
Exactly. I think you also hit the nail on the head, right? Descriptive hierarchies are often built around commitments and not necessarily rules. I think that is the important piece. So you have because you have shared finances with your wife, you have certain commitments which are going to be prioritized over something else, right? Again, same with co-parenting. Like that relationship is just going to trump others because of your commitment.
Yeah, I mean that's really real for me. I finances. We did a show on money, and finances is something that I continue to think about and struggle with. But that is something that comes up continually in our relationships because I cohabitate in two different places, and so I share expenses in two different places. But the majority of my income goes to my primary household, if you will, my house that I own with my wife. And that's also where my daughter lives. So there's lots of expenses to be had just because of her. And so there is not an equal proportion, if you will, of money being spent. Exactly. Lots of snacks. We're going to get a puppy soon. And so there's going to be lots of money there as well.
I am so excited about your puppy. And yes,
very
puppies are expensive.
So there's a lot of money that goes there. And then that's part of why I work so much, is because I recognize in my own mind, no one said this to me, in my mind, I'm like, my day job has to afford this household. And so I need to work extra to be able to afford that household. And so there's a conversation that I've had in my head that has resulted then in different structures, different me working more, different commitments, and it creates tension on both ends. So just naming the existence of what this looks like in real life, it is messy and complicated, and sometimes yucky feeling.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think this is, I feel like when you are in a non-monogamous relationship, we talk a lot about this idea of like a dimly lit room, right? You go from a dimly lit room to a stadium-sized spotlights on a relationship where there's just more of everything, more need for communication, more complication, more negotiation, more conflict, as well as more love, more connection, more fun, more adventure, obviously. And that more is like across the board from both ends of the spectrum, fun and games all the way to doom and gloom.
Yes. And so let me take a second, because I'm talking about it from my end as being part of a couple, but from the perspective of my partner, it is disappointing that we can't get married. It is disappointing that there is not extra funding available for us to do certain things because my money is tied up in other places. Like, there are things that, because of the way it is inherent in the structure of my marriage, that is a forced imposition on my relationship with her, that then means that she has to live with that and adjust to it and become okay with it if she wants to stay in partnership. And that's really, I have sat in the pain of that, and I understand how challenging that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We talked a lot about descriptive hierarchy. There's also prescriptive hierarchy, right? That structure, prescriptive hierarchical structure, is often governed by rules, and often rules of the couple over the other people, right? So it's like it's dictated upon. And also prescriptive hierarchies is where we start to use language of primary and secondary relationship to mark the difference in between relationships. And that's when you're kind of dictating the structure of all of the dynamics, right? You kind of, instead of thinking as a constellation, you're putting it as a list.
Yes. Okay, I can think of some examples of that. Certainly, I think when my partner was with dating somebody else, there were conversations around fluid exchange, for example, and we certainly had couples privilege in that way, and that was not something, at least in the beginning, that felt comfortable somewhere else. Or certain days of the week, like not being able to see somebody right before they saw me, and those were things that then were imposed upon that other relationship based on our agreements and commitments that were very prescriptive, right? That was not just natural. We sat down, had the conversation. I'm sure that I was the one who brought some of those things up and was like, hey, in the beginning, this would make me feel more comfortable. And then that was a conversation that she had to have with the person that she was seeing, and they had to adjust to that. So, yeah. I mean, often you hear things like, when I work with couples and they're at the beginning of their journey, they'll say things like, I want to meet the person you're dating. You're dating somebody, after 3 dates, I want to meet them. And then the conversation very much gets focused on should they meet, how they meet, and all that kind of stuff. And at some point, I find myself almost unanimously across the board stop and realize, like, you do have to ask the other person. You do have to ask if they want to meet you. And, before you go down deep into, like, what is it going to look like? How are you going to feel? Should you? When should you? Like, what should you talk about? Before you do any of that, you need to ask the other person, like, do you want to meet my primary partner, my other partner, my nesting partner, whatever the conversation is, right? Yeah.
So this is one of those, like, couple privilege, being blind to the other person being a fully flesh and blood person and not an extra in your show, to kind of think, okay, we need to ask that person how they want to handle this, right?
Yes. I want to pause there for a second, because I think that is 100% right. Two things stand out for me. Number one, this idea that the couple is the protagonist and that these other folks are just like characters in their story.
Right. Not even characters, like extras.
Right, exactly. And so we define all the things, and your script is written based on our story. And that lens then does not, to your point, see them as a full human being.
Right.
And I think what actually is challenging is when a couple is opening up, which is often how we're talking about non-monogamy, there is probably some impetus to that. Unless both folks have naturally always felt non-monogamous and now they're finally comfortable saying it, there has been either a lag in their sexual activity. There's there's a distinction between how one person wants to be social or date or flirt and the other person, but there's some gap that needs to be filled. And often then folks are looking for someone to fill that gap, that sex gap, that kink gap, that romantic gap. And then does that mean that the auxiliary partner is broken down to just that little piece, just a little puzzle piece that's fitting into my life and my relationship, and not like a whole human being who actually has their own needs and wants and desires for a relationship?
Exactly. The people are not need fulfillment machines, right? And sometimes when people are opening up, they get so focused on their experience. They don't, like you said, they don't think of the other person as a person with their own life, but see like, oh, there is this need within our relationship, and we're going to use this person to fulfill it, and that is it. And I think that could definitely be, one of the struggles. And I love that, we already start using the term auxiliary partner, right? Which is something that I've been using in my practice for years now. I find the secondary, tertiary language to be problematic because it assumes hierarchy where there is an inherent hierarchy unless it is agreed upon, right? Just because I am talking to a couple and when we might be talking about their other partner, by calling it secondary, I am assuming automatic hierarchy, which there doesn't need to be a hierarchy. And I think when we have language that automatically offers a specific dynamic, then it's very hard for us to think about it in any other term, right? And that's why I start talking about the other relationship as auxiliary relationships, which speaks more to the constellation than to the value order of people. Right? Yes. So an auxiliary partner just means, oh, this is the core partner, often a couple. Sure, that is the couple privilege, right? And then there is an auxiliary partner that fits to the structure from the outside, and there is no inherent value judgment there or value order there. And then all these people, 3 people, 4 people, whomever, can think through what the design of this relationship is going to look like without necessarily being top down.
Yes, right. They can redesign it so that it doesn't feel that way. Or, it makes me think of the episode that we did last week with Professor David Buss, and talking about how we categorize people. You're an 8, you're a 7. Now you have a better job. You're a 9, and our desire to put people into hierarchy. And so it seems similar to that, in that we are specifically naming this is what that structure looks like, and as a result you are secondary to that person who is primary, where the language shift that you're recommending is auxiliary and core has to do with defining the relationship and not the person. I like that a lot.
Exactly. And I think it's important. Again, this is not about pro or against privilege or hierarchy. It's just being conscious and dynamic with it and making some decisions. And understanding the simple dynamic that privilege is given and hierarchy is a choice. And you get to make choices.
Yes. And I want to go back to what you were just saying about, or what we were talking about in terms of being an extra in their story or meeting a particular need. That may work for somebody, right? Like, so for example, right now in my life, if somebody, let's just put it out there and name it. I have no time for other partnerships. There is no bandwidth or capacity. But imagine if there were, and someone said, I really just want someone to travel with and have like amazing romantic sex, and oh, okay, sure. That's not do the bills, not help you with childcare, not like have conversations around, who's going to pick up the laundry. Sure, that sounds great. So I imagine that there are times when fitting a particular need or gap actually feeds everyone.
I think the key is having mutuality, right? I think if one party has needs that are not being fulfilled because they're just in service of this gap, I think that's when it breaks down. And I think if everyone's in alignment, like you said, your lifestyle, what you need right now happens to align, or your connection, maybe, I've definitely have had people in my life that I've had, intense, amazing, fun, great sexual chemistry, sexual connection with, but frankly, just wouldn't have dinner with because we just didn't have anything else in common, right? This is not a value judgment or think of people, good or bad. It's just the connection is what it is, and we honor the connection and enjoy our time together and we're respectful and kind and communicative to one another, and it's okay. It works. It works. So just because you're doing this one thing with a certain person, it doesn't mean something is wrong with that relationship. The important piece is that there's mutuality across the board.
And mutuality, not just within the relationships, right? Within the core of who's in those relationships, but mutuality also with the people around you. Because we started off by saying that privilege exists because the culture, the norm, society creates it so. That doesn't change just because now the 2, the 3, the 4 of you have decided on a different structure. So that's a challenge.
For sure. Yeah. There's still very much this idea of the real relationship, right? And it might not be felt within the relationship dynamics of the people, but it can definitely be pointed out by other people. They're outside the relationship. And I think it's one of the very few times where I have really struggled in my polyamorous relationship is when I actually felt this myself personally, firsthand, when my partner at the time, his sister was getting married, whom I met. I met his sister and his sister's fiance. I actually spent a weekend together, all of us, he, his wife, myself, them. And then we emailed and texted after that and stayed in somewhat of a touch. And then when they were planning a wedding, they decided that it was going to be family only. And they had asked, so my partner at the time had actually said, yeah, guess what? They set a date, they're getting married and, it's going to be in the UK and kind of gave me the dates. And then, a few days later, he had to come in and be like, hey, listen, you know about that wedding? So they want to keep it to family only. And they were very clear that it was, me and my wife. And that because the relationship that we had just didn't count as family and wasn't validated, And at that point, we'd been dating for 4 years.
Wow.
I'd been a best man at their wedding. We're practically cohabiting. We're definitely living in the same building. Very connected. So at that time, I'd very much considered, we all considered each other as family. And it was one of those rude awakenings or, just bumping your head against an invisible wall when I was told that our relationship didn't count as family. This is couples privilege. This is hierarchy. But it's being applied from the outside, right? So that's another point of view to consider.
Yeah. How did your former partner react to that? Because that's a tough position to be in.
I think he handled it considerably well, given the situation. I think what he learned from it, we all learned from it, is that we, at the time, were very much living within our bubble where we had a very supportive community and a lifestyle, and we just weren't expecting something like this. And the reason why, I think where he felt what he screwed up was, without getting a confirmation that all 3 of us were going to the wedding, he kind of approached me and wanted to share his joy and excitement and say, yay, they finally set a date and say it's happening. And I think what he learned from it is I should have really made sure that this was something that was available for all of us. And I think he would have approached it differently if he knew that I wasn't going to be invited. I think we defaulted to, of course, the 3 of us are going, because at that point, that's how our relationship was structured. He felt bad that he didn't do his due diligence. But then, again, we were living in a situation where our relationship choices were very much supported and endorsed. And I personally had never come across this idea that our relationship wasn't real enough until that point. And then I had that experience. And at the time it sucked. And then I'm lucky that relationships are also my work, and then I kind of, over time, I processed it and turned it into insight and a place for empathy, and to be able to talk about, hey, by the way, couple privilege and hierarchy happens from the outside. It doesn't always happen from the inside, right? So allow me to speak to that.
Yeah. So let's dig into that then. That idea of, you're right, that the hierarchy and the decisions that are made within relationships of all parties in the relationship impact certainly not only the construct of that, but how people feel in that. So if you are now listening to this and saying, oh man, I think unconsciously I really have been imposing some things. I need to do some things differently. Or if you are a partner of someone who is married or who is in a core partnership or marrying, engaged with a couple and dating a couple, you may now be hearing this and say, yes, this doesn't feel good. There are things we need to talk about. So can we dig into that a little bit? What are the conversations that need to be had? What are some of the things that can be considered?
For sure. Yeah. I think, we talked about this earlier. I think the most important piece is to realize that auxiliary partners are people, not just, extras in your story. And then they need to be considered just like anybody else. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. I remember when Lola Jean did the threesome workshop for us. And that video, I think, is on our Patreon. And in that conversation, she talked about that. There's so much dialogue around what the couple wants to experience from the third person and that they, the wildness or the this and that, and they're going to tell that person all those things. Now, unless it is a sex worker, which is a great way to do that. And then you can say all the things and they still need to be considered what they want, what they feel, comfortable in their boundaries. But there was no dialogue in the outside world about what that third person wants out of the threesome. And Lola Jean kept emphasizing it. Actually, this is a co-creation between the three of you and what you all want to experience together. So I see it in so many different places.
That's why it's called couple privilege, right? Because it's pervasive.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. I think the other piece that can be done is to really define and calibrate the availability with all parties, right? What does that mean? To really define the relationship and what is available in that relationship, and for people to say, oh, okay, like I can subscribe to that and it's going to work for me, right? And, earlier you were saying, I'm only available for travel and occasional texting, right? Great. You're defining something and you're naming something.
Yes. Yeah. Even as you're saying that, it's making me think beyond certainly availability in days and hours, but availability emotionally as well. I remember when my partner started to date somebody else, as a result of our structure, we're with each other every other week. And so she had a full week to be able to spend with somebody else, but wanted some time on her own, really did prioritize our relationship emotionally. And the person that she was seeing, I think, wanted more emotional connection than she was willing to give. And so it wasn't the barrier. She just did not have the emotional availability that the other person wanted from that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, bandwidth is a thing, right? Like, bandwidth is all the things. It's time, energy, emotional focus, a bunch of things, right? And what is available is what is available. And by the way, lack of availability is not a bad thing, right? The idea is not to be fully available at all times to all people. Like, we do need boundaries, and this is why the idea of defining and calibrating availability, rather than saying be available all the time, right? That's not the point. Lack of availability is not a bad thing. And some people are looking for less availability, right? So in your case, with your partner, she might have actually pursued this relationship if it was like light and, part-time, and like didn't really, was with somebody who also wasn't looking for anything deep, was looking for these like fun, casual, but familiar and safe-ish hookups, right? Maybe that relationship could have gone somewhere. So somebody who's looking for less availability would have been ideal in that situation, right?
Yes. I have a friend who loves her work and is really passionate about her side hustle that she's bringing up into a full business and has dedicated lots of time to it, and was dating someone who wanted more time and attention. And she realized, like, I know I want to actually give it to my work. I don't want to give it to you. And so we were talking about it, and I was saying non-monogamy is something that she could consider. Not that she necessarily would be practicing it on her end by dating multiple people, because she certainly doesn't have the bandwidth, but looking for folks who may be engaged in other relationship, that they're not looking for more time or emotional connection from more than what she has available.
Exactly. I think, I've shared my experience of being an auxiliary partner and what that looks for me in a conversation that you and I had, which is now going on Patreon. So if you want to sort of understand sort of anecdotally what it's like to be an auxiliary partner and why I would choose that, you can definitely jump on the Patreon and listen to that. The short version of that is similar. Like I did not at the time wanted to be the solely responsible for a relationship. So it worked for me that everybody that I was dating at the time were in, in committed primary relationships, and the responsibility of that fullness of a relationship was met somewhere else. It really worked for me at the time, right? I felt like I didn't want that responsibility.
And you had the fun bits.
Exactly, that I was on vacation relationships all the time, which is great. I think the most important thing here is that you need to be clear, honest, and don't overpromise. I think that is the key, right? The idea is not that you need to be available fully to everybody at all times, but you need to be clear about your availability, time, energy, attention, libido, whatever tracks are important to you, is to be clear, be honest with the other person, and realize, just because you don't have full availability, it doesn't mean that they're going to run away, right? Sometimes people aren't clear about their availability because they feel like it's going to put the other person off. You're actually better off stating it earlier in the process so they can make informed decisions, right? And you do want to align on this with somebody, rather than, you don't want to be with somebody who thinks that there's more available than there is, right? It's going to cause trouble down the line. And just don't overpromise, right? You're better off building a relationship one brick at a time than saying, this is where we're going to get to, or this is what's available, right? You know your cap because you have other agreements, but don't overpromise. Like, just be clear, be honest, and take it one brick at a time.
On all ends. If you're the auxiliary partner, getting really clear on what it is that you want and having that conversation is really important. And I even add to that, allowing for evolution of those things, but communicating those evolutions. And so again, there's so many people that I've seen who enter into non-monogamous dating relationships, and they're saying, well, I'm just dating around, so it's fine. Like, you can be with date other people. I'm dating other people. And then there's an emotional connection. And now I want more than actually I first said. I wanted it to be light, but now I don't want it to light. I want it to be more serious. But that person was very clear with me. They were only available to light. And I've observed that, honestly, the one of the women that my partner dated, that was happening. And I could see that struggle of her wanting more and more from the relationship. And my partner just became more and more distant, which then it was a cycle that then she want more and more attention and time and connection. So naming the evolution of that, because when my partner named it with her, she was saying, no, I'm still light. It's fun. It's great. But clearly that wasn't the case, right? Like, her behavior was indicating that she wanted more. So how can everybody be really clear, know that it'll evolve, and make sure to talk about what it is that you need?
Yes. I think also, going back to the thing that we say all the time, which is to know thyself, right? So if you know that you're monogamous and you're dating around, but you just happen to be dating somebody who's polyamorous or in an open relationship or non-monogamous, you need to check in with yourself and say, can I continue to date, right? Sometimes people are non-monogamous because they don't have the capacity, and this is not a value judgment, just they don't want to use the bandwidth to have multiple relationships, or they feel like they can't nurture more than one connection, that they are truly monogamous, right? So if you're somebody who's truly monogamous and you're dating around and you happen to connect with somebody who's polyamorous, you should know that about yourself, that you might not continue to date and find a relationship going forward, that you might get stuck in this connection where there is not the availability that you're looking for, right? If it's okay for you to continue to date, continue to make new connection, continue to nurture these relationships, and keep thriving in the rest of your life, great. If you find yourself in a relationship with somebody and you aren't able to meet the needs that are not met in that relationship elsewhere, and it's causing you pain and suffering, it's probably not the right structure for you.
Yeah. I love what you just said around having those things met elsewhere. People don't need to be in multiple relationships to have their needs met, right? Friendship is such an important relationship. We did that. We did a whole episode on friendship. Yes. That counts too. Having rich friendships, having a career or a passion that you love and involved with, loving to spend time with yourself. There's so many ways in which we can feed ourselves outside of romantic partnership or sexual relationships. And so if your bucket is full, yes, that's great. And if there's some gaps that you're looking for, again, just name it. That's all we're saying. Just know it, just name it.
Exactly. So Another way to design around privilege and hierarchy is to consciously decide how you want to treat everyone involved in the relationship and remain in integrity of those decisions, regardless of how the core relationship is going, right?
Yeah. So talk me through that some more.
A good example would be this idea of like which relationship is going to get saved/fixed, right? So often in situations where maybe there's a couple and one of the couple is dating somebody else, or they have an auxiliary partner, and the core relationship struggles for whatever reason. And in an effort to save it, the auxiliary relationships get cut, right? There's too much pressure from the people are feeling insecure because of that. And then so there's a decision always made. The default decision is always to save the core relationship, the couple relationship, even at the expense of auxiliary relationships that might actually be doing well.
Yes, I'm guilty of that. After I found out about my wife's emotional infidelity, there was absolutely a period of request to say, please do not see that person. Please limit your time. And then over time, once a month, once every 2 weeks, once a week, like it started to, but that ask was completely focused on me, my needs, and our relationship, and I had zero thought about what my metamor was feeling and experiencing, which now I would do differently. That was kind of, baby Polly Jackie.
Look at you now doing a podcast on polyamory.
I know, it's true. It's true. Yeah.
That's so
but
funny.
that idea of you need to stop seeing that other person, or you need to see them less. That person is a person. And I've even heard more than that. I've talked to folks who feel like when the core relationship is struggling, the auxiliary partner should observe that and back away to allow the core relationship to be healed. And when that doesn't happen, there's not only a frustration with the partner, but often there's a frustration with the auxiliary partner saying they don't respect us enough to not be involved and to back off. And that framing is very much they're a character in our story, as opposed to thinking about what the experience for them is.
Yeah, absolutely. Something came up the other day in a session that it was insightful for everyone. Non-monogamy is not necessarily the opposite of monogamy, right? They're actually kind of very different structures. There aren't the exact opposite of one another, even though the language kind of stipulates that it does. Non-monogamy is a different way of thinking, being, acting, perceiving relationships and dynamics and values and feelings. So it's not just a matter of, over here in monogamy, we don't fuck other people. Hi guys, over here in non-monogamy, we fuck other people, right? It's just not that simple, right? So I think it's important to realize, like, if you are swimming in the non-monogamous waters, you're in a different environment. You need to examine pretty much everything. You need to examine your relationship with time, about attention, about safety and security. It's really helpful to examine, for example, whether you're community minded or not, right? It really is helpful if you're a community minded person. That is going to help you, when you're swimming in the non-monogamous waters, than if you're somebody who's more of a personal thinker, right? If you sort of put the person or the unit first versus, have this idea of a community. It's one of the reasons why we say to people, when you're opening up your relationship, community matters. Not only because you want the support of the community, and not only because you want to be with like-minded people and learn from them, but also to cultivate a community mindset and realize that if you're monogamous and if you're dating, if there's two of you and then you're dating some other people, and at some point what you have here is a micro community that you're managing. It's really worth thinking about non-monogamy in a more expansive way than, hey, over here we don't fuck other people. Hey, over here we fuck other people, and it's done.
Yeah. And it's hard to do this. We can say it really easily. I can stand here on this podcast and say it is hard. I remember when, after I got married, it was our honeymoon, and my wife said, well, I want to make sure to build in some time to connect with my partner not here. And first of all, I was floored. I was disgusted. I was just like, what? Like, how could that be? Like, it should be about me and us. And like, right. Many years later, now that I have a partner that I'm deeply committed to, I get it. At the time, I was shocked and appalled. What? I was absolutely saying, no time. No, you can't do that, because it hurt. The idea of them talking hurt. And so just because we're saying, oh, make sure you consider everybody and like, make sure you consider everyone's needs. And yes, do that. Yes. That is because I think it'll make things a little like that framing may help in your decision making, but it is not easy to do that. And it's not easy to be the person who is trying to navigate that. I have been on vacation myself trying to figure out how can I connect with my partner in a way that doesn't feel distracting or disrespectful or so in all spaces and places I've been, in this pattern, and it's not easy in any of the ways. For me, at least. I'm sure there are many people out there that it is easy. I'm not there yet, but I'm building the muscle. I'm just thoughtful about it, and I just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And then I build a muscle for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not, relationships are hard, period. Non-monogamy requires more work because there are more people and more relationships, period. Non-monogamy requires us to swim against the status quo because of privilege and how society is structured, and we just talked a bunch about that, right? So the conditions are hard for sure, which is one of the reasons why you need to be super clear to why you are going down this path. What is it that you're trying to create? What is it that you're working towards? Why put up with all the stuff? Why the extra effort, right? Why do the work to become more emotionally flexible and sort of be open to expansion and growth, right? All this stuff is like pain, hardship. Like you need to be clear to why you're doing this. And that is what's going to get you through. That is what's going to make you examine that stuff and make different decisions, even though it's not the obvious prescription that's given to you.
And in that, I think there's a level of ownership once you do that thought, because one of the things that I've seen, experienced, and folks that I've coached as well is when one person is creating more of the, I was going to say rules, agreement. Well, I don't know if they're agreements. It may be more like rules in the beginning. And the other person has agreed to live with that. The way in which they are communicating that to the auxiliary partner is also really important, because it's not just mutually agreeing to something. Once you agree to it, you got to own that thing.
Right, exactly. Because it's an agreement and it's a commitment, and it is not something that you just pass on from one partner to another.
Right. So for example, if you and your partner love going to the beach, and one day your auxiliary partner says, let's go to the beach, but that is an agreement that you have made and agreed to, that the beach is sacred space for you two in your relationship. If you said, I would love to go with you, but my wife won't let me. Like, she's not going to be happy about us going. So we got to pick something else. I'm sorry about that, but that's an agreement that we had. That's not the best way to communicate that message. That doesn't take ownership. It is creating now a rift between the two metamors. Not the best strategy.
No, it breeds animosity. It's also immature, and I don't mean that in a value judgment way, but immature in terms of like, oh, my husband won't let me, or my wife won't let me, right? We are adults in adult relationships with autonomy over our lives, right? You're agreeing to a request, right? You're not a child and not someone's giving you permission to do something. That if you agreed, then you agreed as two adults that had a common thought and a commitment in between, and you both subscribe to that, and that's where you stand. So you need to be able to stay in integrity of that from your own stance, rather than get to a place where like, yeah, my wife won't let me, my husband won't let me, my partner won't let me, right? That's an immature way of thinking about things.
Yes. And so the alternative then is either don't name that agreement or boundary and just suggest something else. Oh, instead of the beach, why don't we go to the amusement park? I think that would be so much fun. We can go to a water park together. Just change it something else, or say, honestly, the beach is a sacred space for us. And so let's find some other place and some other way of enjoying this summer that feels unique to you and I. Let's create some spaces together that feel good for us. And in both of those ways, you're owning it in that you are not blaming your partner for any of the restrictions that may exist within the partnership.
Exactly. And you're not breeding the sort of this contentious dynamic, which you don't want to come up and bite you on the ass down the line.
Yeah, and it puts one person in power, right? I remember when my partner was dating somebody, and we had some guidelines around like fluid exchange and some of the toys that could be used and things like that. And it sounded like the person who she was with wanted to do some of the things. And I believe that my partner at the time, said, I can't, but let me ask. Let me ask to see if that's something that we can do. Right. So now that puts me in a position of power to like say yes or say no. And like people are going to get mad and sad because I said yes or said no. So like that's like I become a villain in the story. But I also, that power then demonstrates to me like, oh, I now own the show and I get to map out what this story looks like.
Right. I think this sort of kicks back to this idea of a descriptive hierarchy and a prescriptive hierarchy. I think really understanding those and looking at it from a place of commitment and agreement rather than dictatorship and rules, right? That's kind of where we come back to and realize, okay, here's what I've committed to, and here's how I uphold my commitments and stay in integrity is a way to think about it rather than saying, well, here are the rules, so we have to. I'm only allowed to do this, and we have to do that, and not the other. Another way that people kind of yield that power of hierarchy and privilege is when they think about meeting the auxiliary partner. If that's the case, you need to think about a few things. One, it's not really just up to you. So I hear, just from a coaching point of view, I hear a lot of conversations around whether one of the core partners should meet the auxiliary partner, what should it look like, when, what they want out of it. At no point they actually kind of stop to say, I wonder if they want to meet me. Right? Or do they want to meet me at all? Right? And the other piece is, what are your intentions when you want to meet this person? For example, are you meeting this person because you are genuinely curious and looking for a connection and you want to get to know this person and kind of allow you to have more space and tolerance for that relationship? Is that why you're meeting them? Or are you meeting them because you want to mark your territory and check them out and exert control and kind of get territorial? And from the outside, it can look like, smiles and everyone being cordial from the outside. But I think it's really important to be really clear about your intention of going there. I think that is really important, that it's not some sort of a veiled power play.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, we continue to find ourselves back to where we always find ourselves, which is first you need to know yourself.
Know thyself.
Know thyself. Right. Know what it is that you want anywhere that you are in that constellation of that relationship. Know what it is that you want. Communicate that thing in the beginning, up front, as it's evolving. Be respectful of everyone and recognize that you are not the protagonist in the story, that everyone actually is a main character. And then own the decisions. Own the decisions that have been made. Don't put that on somebody else. Don't blame it on the relationship. If it is really mutually agreed upon, then own that and have those conversations also with integrity.
Ultimately, you can't choose your privilege, but you can choose how you treat people. So be kind and considerate, people.
If you want to share your story or question about couples privilege, hierarchy, or auxiliary relationships, then come to the Facebook group. That is the place where we're going to have conversations after the podcast about how we feel about it, what this looks like in real life, what folks can do. So check out the Facebook group at We Are Curious Foxes. You can also use at We Are Curious Foxes to find us on Instagram and on Patreon. Make sure to follow us and like us there, as well as right here, wherever you're listening to us in this moment, that app. Press follow, press like, press share. Leave a rating, any of the things that can allow us to continue to share our message and expand out all of the storytelling that we do. We're really appreciative. And the last way that we can hear from you directly is via email or phone call. You can send us an email or a voice message at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com, or you can call us so that we can hear your amazing voice at 201-870-0063.
This episode is produced and edited by Nina Pollock, who we feel privileged to be in a relationship with. Our intro music is composed by Dev Saha. We are so grateful for their work. And we're grateful to you for listening. As always, stay curious, friends. Ideally, auxiliary partners are essentially... Hold on, there's been an earthquake. Whoa, we're having an earthquake. 1 second.
Oh, wow.
Hold on.
Yes.
Oh, aftershock. Right, okay, so we had an earthquake. Onwards.
The world like was annoyed by your disdain for Valentine's Day. It like shook in protest.
Literally.
You will fall in line.
Yes. Or it reflected my annoyance and
That's
took in support. Whichever way
that.
you look at it. But yeah, anyway.
Okay,
the
let's go
earth
back.
beneath me shook. Let me just get back into it.
Exactly.
I was just going to say it pisses on everyone's relationships, but probably not. Let's not say that, Nina.
I can hear Simone in the kitchen singing to herself.
That's funny. Curious Fox podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.